Welcome to the Contagious Code Podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Purcell, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today on the podcast, my guest is Alexander Lichter, who is an active member in the Vue.js community and the Nuxt community, who also has started recently a new job at a company called VoidZero, which is a relatively new company, and he leads developer relations there. What is VoidZero and why is this important? VoidZero comes out of the project Vite and Vue.js. These are open source projects that power, frankly, most of the web. Vite, V-I-T-E, is the standard bundler, compiler, development server, etc., that literally most engineering teams use to build powerful products. In fact, you've probably used it if you've built a website or similar. In our discussion today, we talk about the company VoidZero, but we really spend our time talking about where developer tooling for the web is going, speaking about how Vite is changing, and Vite is changing. Vite is adopting a new unified toolchain built primarily in the Rust programming language, which is way more efficient and leads to significantly faster performance gains, up to 16 times faster. What used to take a long time would now take 1/16 of the time. It's enormous and very, very powerful. And of course, I can say numbers all day, but you'll never really know until you actually feel it and experience it. So in our discussion, we talk about how these things are changing, how teams are getting better, and we also talk about what it takes to create truly great products. Because to be honest, there are many alternatives to the tools like Vite today. There's, for example, Webpack, there's RSpack, there's a tool called SWC or Small Web Compiler, all kinds of things. And we sort of zero in on what it takes to make a winning product. Because Vite is a winning product. It's like the standard today. And how did they get there? We discover that. We also talk a little bit about Alex, his journey himself as he started this new job, how he got that job, and how you can get the job that you want. To him, this is a dream job because this job he was doing it for free before the company hired him. So plenty of takeaways, either as a job seeker or an engineer or a compiler developer tool enthusiast. You definitely have something in this episode. I'd like to offer this to all of you at no cost, and the way we can do that is through partners and sponsors. So let's take a moment and acknowledge them, and then we'll get into the episode. The Contagious Code Podcast is partnered with Code Crafters. Code Crafters is a great way on how you can level up your coding skills by building tools that developers use, rebuilding them from scratch in a language that you choose. So if you wanted to build something like Vite or RSpack or Rollup, which is a developer tool, if you wanted to build that in Rust, then you choose the tool, you choose Rollup, you choose the programming language, you choose Rust, and it will hold your hand as you re-implement this thing in a new language and teach you along the way. It's a great way to level up your coding skills, and you can get an enormous discount using the link in the show notes. That's tej.as/codecrafters. We're always open to more sponsors and partners, and if you want to reach out, just go to tej.as. You can get in touch there, and we would love to partner with you and your product. Thank you so much for sticking around. Here's my discussion with Alexander Lichter. Welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me for the second time. It's great to be here.
It's nice that you came back. And I will say this, you are one of the best guests, because you're a YouTuber yourself. That's not to discredit other guests who aren't, but there's a familiarity you have with this, so I appreciate having you on.
Yeah, of course. For me, I'm always up for a chat, and I mean, especially with podcasts, it's so much fun, and I don't know, I don't need big preparation, and of course, sound and video is fine, so it's also a big part as well. Also, as a podcast host, I know this as well. Ideally, you have at least a somewhat okay mic that will help also in post production and so on. But yeah. Curious what's on this episode. Also, if you haven't checked out the last episode, then that's linked in the show notes, I suppose.
Totally. Look at you playing host. That's awesome.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. I think you in German, I would say du bist ein Traumgast. You're just you're a dream guest for multiple reasons. Just because you're so familiar. I'm excited to chat about what's new. I mean, for those who don't know, and I already said this in the intro, but Alex is very, very active in the Vue.js ecosystem. And our previous episode, indeed, linked in the show notes, covers a lot of the Vue.js and Nuxt fundamentals and why people choose it. But since then, there's been some developments, and that's why Alex is here today, to talk to us about updates to cutting edge JavaScript tools. I want to talk about specifically VoidZero and what they're doing there, especially after Vite and sort of lessons from Rome. And we'll talk about all of that. But before that, Alex, just by way of introduction, for those who maybe didn't listen to that first episode, can you share a little bit about how does one get involved with such cutting edge JavaScript tooling?
Yeah, I mean, how do I get started? I think like now my position is DevRel at VoidZero. It probably just came because I was very open with the things I do, like open source contributions, but also content creation from like blog posts every now and then, but also being active on socials, being interested and passionate about projects. And of course, also like the YouTube and the podcasting help a lot when you, well, in this case, I wasn't necessarily looking for, but if you look into DevRel position and showing that you can like create content, are good at like community building, asking questions, communication, that's pretty key altogether. You don't need all of these at once, like, or also sometimes not at all. It really depends what you're looking for. But in my case, what happened was, well, I was doing some consultancy. That was my main business. Now it's just a couple days a week because I'm at VoidZero now for most of the time. And there are also other things. We just mentioned YouTube, podcast, and so on. But yeah, so I started doing YouTube videos mainly because I was interested in having that content in the community. And no matter which like framework or library and so on you like, content is so important for the ecosystem. And that's once again, like, it doesn't matter if it's a blog post or video, just like have some good content on there. I think it's important for everybody who wants to like learn, but also for the authors to see how people understand it, what's maybe like should be documented better, and so on. And yeah, from there, I was not looking for anything. And like one random Sunday afternoon, I got like a message from Evan, who was in touch, of course, before due to like being in the Vue ecosystem, speaking conference and so on. It was like, yeah, let's have a chat. And that's how it started, so to say.
Awesome. Build in public. That's the big lesson. I will +1 that because that's how I got my job at Vercel, which was formerly known as Zite. I was a highly community driven person, as I probably am now. And as part of that, I accidentally crossed paths with the Vercel team and really vibed with Guillermo, the CEO, also a guest on the podcast. And this was when, exactly like you, I got a completely unexpected DM from him on socials going like, hey, do you want to join us and lead DevRel? I was like, wow, that's crazy. Because at the time, it was like 18, and I was like inexperienced, sort of new in the European tech scene. Mm-hmm. And I have this like San Francisco CEO going like, hey, do you want to? And I thought, wow, that's so cool. So,
yeah.
Okay, so thank you for that. The lesson here immediately off the bat is build in public and be relational. Like talk to people, show your work, and then the right opportunities tend to find you. Thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about VoidZero, not to be confused with VZero, which is an AI coding agent.
What like is Void, or there's also Volts. There are a lot of names with V nowadays in the space, but it's correct.
Volt is, for those who don't know, VLT.sh is the package manager that's supposed to replace NPM. But no, let's zero in VoidZero. What is it? What motivated its creation, and how does it relate to sort of the evolution of JavaScript tooling?
Yeah, so VoidZero is a company created by Avenue last year in October. Funnily, the same month I met him in a conference in Japan and asked him a similar question, like how did VoidZero come up and so on. Back then, when it didn't work there.
Sorry to interrupt you, but by Avenue, you mean the creator and author of Vue.js?
And Vite, correct, yes.
And Vite, great,
so
thanks.
The one and only. And so the idea was basically, okay, the big goal is creating a unified JavaScript toolchain. So for people interested in all the tooling, that's probably not the first time you heard like, hey, JavaScript needs some way of unified tooling, because everybody is like, well, picking their own tools here and there. It goes from like transformers, parsers, but also like linters, formaters, and so on. Build tools like Webpack, right? Like bundlers. And nowadays, luckily, a lot of things center around Vite, right? More or less besides Next.js, who bet on Webpack or now TurboPack, which I think for dev that's working well in production. There's like 1 or 2 tests failing, maybe, not entirely sure. But even they also use RSpec now as experimental support, as far as I follow there. But yeah, the idea of VoidZero, just to circle back to that, is to like work on these unified JavaScript toolchains. So ideally have, if people like are into Rust, pretty high, like I say, high programming language nowadays, that there's Cargo. You can use the Cargo for everything, for like testing, building, docs, whatnot, linting, formatting. And having such an experience, like an out of the box, like everything included, what you need for JavaScript is like the big goal, so to say. But until then, there is quite a road ahead.
I'm curious about this because like I know a lot of polyglot programmers. Polyglot meaning many different languages. I myself am one. And for example, Golang is a language that has its own, like it's built into the language itself. It's got its own like lint and formatting tools, Go FMT, for example. The line between, okay, this is a toolchain for the language, and this is a standard library for the language, and this is the language itself is blurry, right? Like you think,
Absolutely.
okay, Golang, you have to, but JavaScript is not like this. And so I guess the question I'm trying to ask is why? Like we had the chairperson of the committee that makes JavaScript, and maybe this is also a question for him. But you have this company VoidZero that exists to create a unified toolchain for a programming language that some would say should have one. So I guess the big question is like, why a unified JavaScript toolchain, and why is it just not part of the language? Like, why do we need it?
I think the center is why can't that be like a standard around it? But I think we see that a lot in TC49 and ECMAScript. So the standard that JavaScript is implementing, right? Standards take time. If we think about all the frameworks that use signals nowadays, which is once again most modern frameworks, and then we see, okay, they slowly move into the standard because people realize, hey, this is what the web dev community needs. There's a proposal, but all these things, of course, take a lot of time and work. And standards are notoriously slow. They're still very good, and it's important to have them. But I think like Rust and Go, they came with, opinions, obviously, but all these built in. And JavaScript is a language that's still evolving, coming from, hey, this should just be a little glue for interactivity running in the browser to, here we go, everything runs everywhere now. And we need to keep up on these things. I guess also that's why these like unified JavaScript toolchain approaches, where VoidZero is not the first one, that they come not from let's say the committee or like from a different company or people working on tools already. Which is important to say there that like VoidZero is basically the tools in the company. So to say is Vite, which is a multi-company project. So VoidZero is not steering the direction there, but we'll talk about Rolldown, we'll talk about OxC, VTest for testing, and so on, so on. So a lot of things there, where it's also not like, okay, why is like random person XYZ, not calling the creator of Vite a random person, but in general, like why is that person aiming towards a unified toolchain? I think that's also because a big part with Vite, for example, as the main build tool, a big the stepping stone is there already.
Interesting. Okay, so I love your answer, by the way. It's just that you said standards move notoriously slow because they need to be slow, because if they're too fast, they break the entire internet, right? And that's why, for example, if you run in JavaScript, if you write type of null, you get object. A null value is an object type because some people have code that depends on this weird behavior. And so they need to move. It's actually a feature that they move slow. I think a lot of us, like in the world of move fast, break things, we associate slow with problems. But I think we need to understand slow is good in the case of something where the majority of the world runs on. For example, like the PlayStation 5 UI, the user interface for PlayStation 5 is JavaScript. Did you know this? It's just JavaScript.
Yeah,
and
it's so fun when you check like the licenses of like all these things, or like the iPhone or like some car manufacturers. It's so crazy where JavaScript is used. Yeah,
and so it would make sense that that's slow, but as a consequence of it being slow, we just don't have modern tooling, which is why VoidZero exists. I love this. Is such a great answer. You must have.
I want to really like add to that, because it's important to emphasize that you cannot break the web, right? While like Rust and Go, like you have versions, right? I mean, we see this with Python 2 and Python 3 for a while now, but at least there you can have versioning. Yeah, with JavaScript and browser, that's not really possible. You have to make sure that even like the old things, sure, you have the ECMAScript standard and browser engines have to implement things, but you can't say this will work differently because then all the other older browsers can't use websites anymore, or the whole web. And yeah, that would be a problem.
Yeah, we need to, part of the intro of this podcast, as we say, we celebrate the beauty of engineering. I think the web is the most beautiful piece of engineering in the entire world. For the reason being, and I mean software engineering, there's some bridges and things like that look cool too.
True.
But like the web, you can pull up a website made 30 years ago, and it just works because the web is. Some say the internet never forgets, but also it just never breaks. And I think that's so cool. Whereas, like, if you try, this actually happened to me today. I was taking a break and I wanted to open Prime Video on my Apple TV, which is, I found out, a very old Apple TV that doesn't have the latest tvOS. And so I just can't watch Amazon Prime anymore on this Apple TV.
Yeah.
Because there's a new version and it doesn't support, but the web is always supported. And so, amen, +1 to that. And that's also why we need these tools. Because as I understand what these tools do, like Vite, for example, as you've mentioned, and I do want us to like introduce Vite and explain it for people who maybe aren't familiar with it. But what Vite will do, among other things, is allow you to write a new version of JavaScript and take that new version of JavaScript and make it work in any browser, or at least, it make it like compatible with the web in the sense that it's not going to break. So that's why these tools need to exist. You've mentioned Vite a bunch of times. Let's zero in on that a little bit. It seems to be the cornerstone of VoidZero, and it was created by Evan Yu, the creator of Vue.js. And in fact, I love Vite. I use Vite. I think it's the greatest way to build websites, at least client-first websites. I'm curious if you could just maybe give a little bit of an intro to Vite and then talk about its role in the bigger context of VoidZero.
Absolutely. Vite, as you mentioned, it's like, I would say, the way to build nowadays modern web applications. And Evan created that while like working on Vue 3, thought about, okay, the Vue CLI back then didn't like, he felt that the experience could be better. And then something which was the prototype for Vite came out. And of course, then he thought, wait, if that works with the browser, like also there once again with the browsers, the standards catching up, a lot of things being available now in the browser in terms of JavaScript, if that all works, what didn't work a couple of years ago, well, why not make that for all frameworks out there, or even like for a vanilla JavaScript application? So why not make that agnostic, which is very happily where a lot of things move nowadays, like more framework agnostic things. That's how Vite was born in a very, very short explanation. And there is an interesting part there. So Vite does a lot of things. It provides a dev server, right? You have hot module replacement, which means if you change something, then you don't have to do a hard refresh, but things will update. It has a very nice plugin ecosystem. Frameworks can create their own plugins for Vite that you just have to install and things work. That works from, React over to Vue and Solid and TanStack and so on. So TanStack Start, for example, will at some point just be a Vite plugin and that's it, which is lovely to see. So the interesting part there is, though, there were built tools before, right? Vite didn't invent HMR or similar, but it was significantly, and still is significantly faster than, for example, Webpack that was there before. And that's because Vite is using, for the dev mode, this is also important, faster in dev mode, a different technique. So Webpack said, okay, we have to bundle your JavaScript and then start a dev server. Bundling means like going through all the files you use, like do a little bit of tree shaking and possibly throw a few things out, but you also have to build a dependency graph saying, okay, that file links to that file, maybe move some things together and so on. And then you start a server, but of course that takes time. And with Vite right now at the moment, what's happening is we have an unbundled dev server. So the idea is let's not do any bundling. Instead, we do the approach the other way around. Sort of like scanning everything first, saying, okay, here's the entry file. And then if you need something, just like request it through dynamic imports, and then it will be imported and sent over by the dev server, which means, the startup experience is great. You start up, it's super fast, and you're good to go. And that's what a lot of people also really enjoyed switching over, just the speed of developing. Plus, once again, the easiness of adoption. There's a very simple and flexible API that people can use. And right now, as I mentioned before, Vite is a multi-company project, so it's not like VoidZero is steering the whole direction. There's a team around that. There are a couple people working at VoidZero, working full-time on Vite, but of course, a lot of other people from other companies, for example, Stackblitz, right? Matthias, also known as Patak, is working at Stackblitz full-time and working on Vite, and a lot of other people. So it's still and it's very important, it's open source, and everything that's written open source under MIT will stay MIT. It's still a very important cornerstone of modern web development, and more what we will iterate on in a bit. But I think that's a good summary of what Vite is about.
Yeah, definitely. So it gives you hot model replacement, a development server, and it has a plugin ecosystem. Does it bundle for you as well? It does, right? It
So
bundles your...
yes, so that's pretty interesting. When you use dev mode, what's used is ES build. That's like a Go based, so kind of native, right? Build tool. And there you, as we said before, like it's unbundled, so you don't want to bundle much. But if you build for production, then Rollup is used. And that's also bundling, then proper, like the whole thing, bundling, tree shaking, everything to get the production build. So it's using not just one bundler, it's using two bundlers under the hood, one for dev and one for prod.
Wow, that is... Okay, so it's a really comprehensive end-to-end solution. I'm curious, if we think about the world before Vite, Webpack. I think Webpack was the tool of choice. I used to pride myself early in my career on knowing how to write Webpack configs by hand. And I would write some amazing Webpack configurations that will tell Webpack, which is a compiler and a bundler, how to bundle and compile my JavaScript code, and how to transpile. So if I'm writing like some future JavaScript, how do you make it browser compatible? So I spent a lot of time learning about this and configuring Webpack, and this led me to be like a tech lead and stuff. But I think this was also the downfall of Webpack. Was the configuration was just too hard, right? And
it was complex. Yeah, that's true.
It was, and it gave you the same things. It gave you a development server. It had a plugin or loader ecosystem, and it had a bundler. But then Vite came in, and why did it win? I think it's safe to say that it won. It won, was it just because it had more sensible defaults, that it was simpler, or what? Or maybe it was faster? I'm curious, like, what your take is on that.
So I think like all these aspects we've just mentioned, like fold into that. The speed, it's just like, okay, I can start my dev server. I can straight away start working on things. I don't have to wait forever until like the dev server is ready bundling. I remember when I was using like Vue and also Nuxt 2 in the past, like that took very long, especially for bigger projects. So that's definitely one thing. Then the adoption rate and like frameworks being open to like, okay, let's take a look. Let's adopt that. The APIs are simple, so people can build their own plugins very easily. Configuration is pretty simple, so people don't have to wrestle like with loaders, as you also just mentioned. So in a way, it was very accessible for not only the framework and library authors, but also for like the average developer. And it still is, I would say.
That's amazing. So the difference and why Vite won is really just developer experience. And
I think that's at least a big part, because if the rest is on par, but of course like the speed, the developer experience is better, then I think that's fair to say that's a good choice. Then we see it also like really, with like Jest and Vitest, right? A bit similar, right? Like the API is pretty similar in terms of compatibility, and that's also on purpose. Like the test, describe, expect, and so on. But still, like you see developer experience wise, a lot of benefits with Vitest. So I would say similar story.
That's incredible. So we talked about takeaway number 1 is build in public and have a community. Takeaway number 2 for people listening, so valuable, is be better or create better user experience. And I'm saying user experience, not developer experience here, because the primary users of things like Vite, Vitest are developers. And so it's UX, and may the best UX win. In fact, the best UX always wins. This is such an important lesson, is you can literally have the same idea and maybe even the same API. Like you mentioned, Vitest and Jest are kind of the same in terms of authoring experience, but the other user experience aspects of performance and time just are so much better. And I think that's a huge lesson for people to learn. I was sitting with some venture capitalists 2 weeks ago and showing them a product I built. They wanted to give me money. I didn't initiate this. They just said, hey, we have money to invest. Can you build something and show us? So I did.
Nice.
And they loved it. But sometimes they play these like social power dynamics games that I refuse to play. And they asked me this question. They said, everybody has the same idea. Why will yours win? And I try not to sound, like a prideful person here, but what I said was, there's many companies, or there were, like in 2007, there were many companies making phones. There was BlackBerry, there was Nokia, there was whatever, but there was only one Steve Jobs, and that's why that phone won. Similar, there's a lot of cloud companies, Cloudflare, Netlify, AWS, but Vercel has a type of taste that puts them ahead with developers. And I ultimately said, hey, it depends on the taste of the founder and their ability to create positive user experience, right? And I think that's really true in this case for all of the things we've discussed with VoidZero so far, specifically Vite. We alluded to Vitest, but I think, what's your take on that? Do you agree, like, really fundamentally, the best UX wins?
I think that's a big part. And then you also go further, like, what's your target group? Like, the best UX for who? Like, understand who you build for. And I think, for example, also going back to Vite in that case, like, okay, the author of one of the biggest JavaScript frameworks, like, built on it. So that helped, I think, a lot as well. And then also very important to mention, other people with different backgrounds, with different framework backgrounds also joined and gave some more input there. And that's, for example, I think that's one of the beauties of Vite, that it's not like, okay, sure, Evan created that, but now so many people work on it with also all the different plugins and giving input and like forming that it's really the almost like a one of a kind project in like the web development ecosystem. It's also way across framework boundaries. So I think that's also like a very important takeaway there.
Fantastic. Yeah. Know your user and then create the experience for them. Also, I think there's something to be said for solving your own problem first, right? You mentioned Evan built Vite because he was building Vue and he needed the tool.
Absolutely. I also agree in that we've seen it in multiple, like in a lot of cases. I personally also think if you have a problem, you understand it like the best at that moment. Maybe your peers, your friends who don't know from, they might not understand it because they never encountered it, or it's maybe not as important. So you're the expert for your problem there. So then try to solve it and then find maybe other people who have the same problem, or identify like, okay, what's the target group there?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, also a very key part. And we see this quite some time. For example, Johnson Chu, who's working on Volar, which, he extracted from the Vue language tool. So the extension for VS Code, the Vue extension for like single file component handling and so on and so on. He said, okay, this works for other frameworks like for Astro or like for MDX, which is not exactly a framework, but custom syntax, you know the drill. And at some point he said like, okay, for that extension, I need a faster signal library because, the one I use is slow. So he built Alien Signals, which is the fastest signal library out there at the moment. And that also came from like solving your own problems. And then, of course, going the extra mile and like generalize it in a way. And I think the people who do that, like the generalization part, and also, once again, figure out their target group and have also the knowledge and maybe also the experience of like, okay, how to align that with maybe the broad JavaScript ecosystem. Yeah, they put out amazing things.
Now that we've identified what makes tools like Vite, Vitest, Volar, everything starts with V. What makes these tools great and what makes them win? I wonder if we can use this information to dissect what went wrong with Rome, or was it called Biome? I don't know. I never really I never looked deep into this project because honestly, from the day it was announced to the day it died, I just thought there's too much chaos here, personally, for me. But I'm curious. Obviously, they're both very similar company ideas, VoidZero and Rome, with being a unified JavaScript toolchain. So I'm curious, have y'all discussed this? Like, tried to understand, hey, what lessons can we learn from that project as we try and make VoidZero successful?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so what happened back then? Okay, Rome was built, it was first built, I think, in JavaScript or TypeScript, and then it was like, okay, let's rebuild that in Rust. And there was then Rome tools, there was VC money involved, and at some point the company was dissolved, so to say. People were let go, money was gone, and the spiritual successor of Rome is still exists nowadays, called Biome, and they also, of course, have the same idea of like, let's build a unified JavaScript toolchain. And right now their focus is formatting and linting. So in a way, they approach it from, let's say, a different angle there. But they're also they're making progress. I know Vercel partnered with them to improve their type-aware linting recently, like a couple of weeks ago. So there are also things happening there. And I think to some degree, there's even a third approach, so to say, which basically comes from the ByteDance folks over there with RSPack and everything around that, with links as React Native killer, quote unquote. and like framework agnostic mobile application framework and so on and so on. They have also a lot of things on there. Like I think at VoidZero, there is a big benefit compared to either of these approaches, which is the 0 to 1 problem, and that's kind of solved for us. Because usually if you say like, okay, you start a startup, it doesn't matter what, you have a product and you say to people like, hey, please use our stuff. Same for like a toolchain. It's nice that you have a cool thing, but if people don't adopt that, it's tricky because you want to have a unified toolchain, right? And with Vite, that stepping stone is there to say, okay, most modern applications out there use that. There are exceptions. We talked about Next.js briefly before. But commonly, like out there, the people use Vite. So let's build on Vite itself, improve the foundation. So also there, do the difficult work first. But of course, let's not focus straight away on things like, I don't know, the formatter, which is still important, but it's not the first thing to do. But take a look at the foundation, and then from there, build towards the vision of unified toolchain.
Y'all have a great head start. That's awesome. You said the 0 to 1 problem, meaning going from like 0 to 1 user. Well, Vite has millions of users, so I'm excited about that. And I agree, it's a bit harder of a sell to adopt something that people aren't already using. So I'm very excited about this. But you said something interesting. You said about when you were talking about Rome, you said there was VC money. Is there VC money in VoidZero too?
Yeah, of course. So that's absolutely correct. VC money is also at VoidZero. VoidZero is funded. We got like 4.6 million seed money in the beginning. Also, Evan mentioned it in the interview back then. I think for lower, like a double-digit percentage. I can't remember the exact number, but you can look it up. It's public info, and no board seats. So that was the start for that. And I mean, of course, open source project and VC money, people are skeptical. And I remember when I heard the announcement, the first reaction was like, amazing. I understand the whole idea and the vision of unified toolchain, because that also came through here and there before the company announcement when we talked. But then the second thought was like, okay, what does the VC money mean? Because obviously at some point you want to have the return of investment, right? And in a way, once again, compared to I don't know, the average startup that's looking for VC money, VoidZero was in a very, very good position there because first of all, Evan has a huge track record, right? With Vite and with Vue, knows a lot of people in the whole space. And the second part, of course, is that he then could say, okay, let's partner with the people that also believe in the vision, that don't say, okay, when can we get our money back the firstest? Or how can we squeeze out revenue or similar? But more partner with the right people to make the thing the reality. And in a way, that's plus with the promise that's saying, okay, everything that's open source will stay open source and MIT licensed, I think is a really good foundation once again to succeed.
But then how do you make money? I mean, what does partner with the right people mean? Does it mean you have
so partner with the right people as find the right investors, right? That's what I meant in this case. Monetization is one thing, but luckily, so right now we're still focusing on, once again, you want to get that unified toolchain up and running. But monetization wise, we want to focus at some point on enterprise customers and also possibly around hosted solutions. So these are the two sectors we take a look at. In the end, what our goal is, of course, that we don't want to gatekeep anything. It's I don't know, you have to pay to use, I don't know. Here's, let's say, Vite and then just make it fully paid or whatsoever. That won't happen. 100% not. And as I mentioned before.
Or Vite Pro.
So Vite Plus is actually something that was announced by Evan at JS World. So that's not Vite Plus Pro Max. No. Yeah. So
tell me about that.
So as we mentioned, that unified toolchain, just a lot of things out of the box and compatibility wise. That's the only thing I can say so far. Except there will be very, very tight integrations with a lot of things. There's a slide I can share the link afterwards, and we can put in the show notes that gives a really good overview. And the more info is coming this year, actually. So stay tuned, all.
That's so ominous, man. That's
yeah. My hands are tied there. Also, mainly because, as I said, right now we focus on a lot of other things first, right? Which is a Rolldown in OxC, so the foundation. of the unified toolchain, which is once again also written in Rust, but a bit differently. Maybe we can like focus on that, plus going back to Vite and how that will also shape Vite itself.
Yes, let's do that. Actually, let's talk about Rolldown. You've mentioned this multiple times. My first exposure to Rolldown was by my great friend, the notorious Zach Jackson. What a guy! Who works over at ByteDance, the team that makes TikTok, and he's just a genius. He's an absolute genius. And lately, he's been doing work with building multi-agent AI systems to help him with stock trading. So cool. And he makes 5 figures daily and says, oh, at this point, it's just like printing money, because he's cracked some like AI workflow to just invest and get high yield very instantly. Anyway, so we'll maybe have him on the podcast.
Yeah, I was just going to say, bring him on. Bring him on.
Yeah. But he is as I understand, the brains behind what is RSPack, which is Rust-based Webpack. I'm curious, and you mentioned Rolldown is Rust-powered bundling. Let's just start at the beginning. What is Rolldown? Why was it made? And what gaps does it fill compared to Rollup, ESBuild? Yeah. And what inspiration does it take from maybe RSPack?
Perfect. So yeah, as you said, Rolldown is basically a Rust-based bundler. And now people could just feel like it's like Rollup, but just Rustified. And no, it's not. Because then we could have just like forked Rollup and just did that, or contribute to it, right? So there are a few more things. And for that, we have to cycle back to Vite and to like the ESBuild in dev and Rollup in prod, what we just talked about a few minutes before. Because that unbundled mode, which is pretty amazing, also has some shortcomings, of course. And especially then we go, Vite got adopted, and also in the enterprise sector. And then you have like applications, not just like 100 or 1,000, but like a huge amount of components, or just like say modules, so files that have to be loaded. And then if you have the unbundled mode, well, you start with that problem that you have to do a single request for each file. And well, if you have tens of thousands of components, that's a lot. And then if you are in a corporate environment and have maybe a proxy, that's a problem. So for very large applications, the dev startup and also the hard refresh can be a bit painful. So that, plus then you have inconsistencies between dev and prod as well, because, well, in production, you properly bundle, you do like tree shaking and so on and so on. In dev, you just serve things differently. These two factors led into the point to think, okay, maybe there is a good way to bring back something else, like a full bundled mode at some point. But how is that even possible? Because if you just say like we bundle in dev, then you run the same problem, it's slow. We've seen that with Webpack. So what's happening is that we basically say, okay, why not taking all the good things from the 3 big bundlers or like out there, from like Rollup, which is the plugin API, the simplicity, from ESBuild, which is the speed, right? And from Webpack, which is, okay, you can optimize things. You have HMR built into the browser and a lot of other features. And of course, also features that are in none of these tools. So even things ahead of all these 3 tools, and fuse them into one bundler that you can use standalone or also in some point as part of Vite. And that's how Rolldown was created. That's also more or less the vision there. And that comes with a lot of unique constraints. Well, first of all, of course, it's based in Rust. So you have to write in Rust and it has to be embedded in JavaScript. But other, as you said before, other projects did that before. But then having the compatibility, so like make sure that all the Rollup plugins are compatible or not needed because, well, they're maybe built in and thus faster, or have at least some way of being able to use that. Because Rolldown should be the default in Vite at some point. We're not there yet, but you can already use them together. And for that, you want to have as little friction and churn as possible. People should, right now, for testing, just easily say, okay, there's a package, it's called Rolldown Vite. You can use that as alias for your Vite dependency. Doesn't matter if it's a direct dependency or otherwise use package overrides. And ideally, things should just work. So then you have that Rust-based bundler in your project. You can try that right now, actually. It's possible. v.dev/rolldown. There's a guide that I also co-contributed to just to say like, hey, how does that work? Here's some maybe caveats, also known limitations that might not work yet, but for most of the cases, just works. So that's the idea behind Rolldown. Also in a nutshell, of course.
So I'm about to show my ignorance here because it's Rust based Rollup, but you as you mentioned, you couldn't just fork it. I mean, the requirements were such that you couldn't just like fork it and rewrite it in Rust.
It's a new tool, basically taking the best out of the previous tools. Exactly. That's very important to highlight. It's not just about the speed or just like it's Rustified version of something that's out there. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm still not fully clear on. And honestly, this is why I do the podcast, because there's people who would be afraid to ask the question I'm about to ask, but I have no shame.
Shoot them over.
I'm like, say I'm using Rollup, or say I'm even using Vite, and I don't know what bundler I'm using under the hood, ESBuild or the other one. You said there were two, right?
Yeah,
Rollup, exactly.
ESBuild and dev always, and Rollup always in production. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I'm using Rollup. I'm doing a production build, and because Vite abstracts this, I could at some point just be using Rolldown without my knowledge. And so
that will happen at some point, yeah.
Right.
As soon as things are stable, like and tested, they will be Rolldown will be the default in Vite. So if you don't do anything and at some point just upgrade your Vite version, that will be the case, yeah.
Right. And then so for me as a developer, the only noticeable change. So just as a little aside, in health science, there's this measure called SWC, which is not small web compiler, but it's in health science, it's smallest worthwhile change. And it's just like the smallest change that means something's off with your health, you know? And so my question here is, do I understand correctly that if I change major versions of Vite and suddenly it's like roll down instead of roll up for production builds, the only thing I'll notice is speed? Is that accurate? Or
well, if you don't change anything, so there are a lot of things you can change. But if you just say, even right now, if you say you alias the thing, depending also on of course what you use, because it's still experimental, like still unstable, right? But at that point, it should be parity, right? There might be things that say like, okay, we have some limitations. So plugins, for example, Vite plugins need some adaptation, but that's also things that like we want to help with, like sending PRs and so on, or if they are unmaintained, forking that, finding other ways around it, and so on. But in the best case, yeah, like for example, for all the major frameworks, there's also something called an ecosystem CI that's set up right now for Vite, so that all the Vite plugins and their tests, also same with frameworks, that they just run for the latest Vite version and they don't fail. And we do the same for Rolldown Vite to also get at some point the whole compatibility with all the major frameworks and their test suites, which is pretty helpful.
So it sounds like the main benefit here is speed, which of course is important. We just talked about, for example, Vitest ingest and why that leads to the better user experience for developers, aka developer experience, and why it will win. So there has to be some data behind this about people, I don't know, complaining, hey, my build takes way too long. I hate this. This is the worst. I'm curious because I see people on Twitter complaining about like, okay, so the new trend is just rewrite everything in Rust. And I know that this is not that. And so I'm curious, like, what were the cues that prompted, let's create Rolldown?
So it's not, of course, speed is one part. And we talked about the unbundled mode, which Rolldown is still supporting. So there's also more to that. There will be a full bundle mode at some point, and there, once again, you need the speed of Rust to actually do that in dev mode, right? To actually have a speed, like a fast bundle in development mode. So for like small and medium applications, ideally, there is no difference between like Vite's unbundled mode in terms of speed and the Vite with Rolldown and the full bundle mode at some point. But that's still a work in progress that's coming. And for larger applications, enterprise large, it will be faster because then you don't have like that request going through the proxy for each of the modules. Then you have a little dev build and things will be fine. So there are a few things around there. But right now, so we have a couple early adopters that tried out Rolldown Vite in different applications. If you just like switch it out right now, people get like, I don't know, between like 2 and 5x speed boost. That's just by switching out the packages for build. And there was, so what we did, Safi from the Vite team also worked on VoidZero. He took Excalidraw, perfect example because it's open source, it's a big application, not like super huge, but big enough to make tests. And the build was slashed down quite a bit, so double digit times. I think like 16 times or so. I'll have to look it up because I'm not kidding. It went down significantly. So there are some improvements in there, and once again, then you can even tweak performance more because as said before, right now, like Webpack has amazing things for chunks, right? To optimize where to put certain chunks. With Rollup, it's a bit more difficult. The SBOT is not that flexible there. So if you say, okay, look, I want to have a certain way of adding certain chunks, you can do that once again with Rolldown. So there's also more than just build speed. But of course, that's one of the good parts there.
And the main driver. So it also sounds like the big benefit is having one bundle. So the plan is, and you're saying this is a work in progress, to replace even ES build for dev builds with every.
Exactly.
It's just roll down all the way down.
So right now, if you use Roll and Vite, it will use only Rolldown, but it will still be unbundled. So Rolldown won't do much in dev mode. They won't do a full like bundle. But this is a mode that will come as opt-in as well at some point and be extra, so people who want it, need it, can try it out. And in the future, that will be the default. So we have a few phases. The phase one right now is, okay, Rolldown Vite. It's there. You can test it. There will be an announcement blog post. Either it's out already or will come out this week. So there's at least that announcement there that the package is there. It's still unstable. It will always be unstable until it's merged into Vite. Right? That's right for like testing everything. So usually, like, you can try it out. Things should work. If not, please feel free to report an issue in the repository. That's always helpful there. So that's the phase one, basically. Then we have like a phase 1.5. It's actually independent of the phases, which is like full bundle mode optional. So at some point when the full bundle mode is ready, it's merged either into Rolldown Vite or into Vite at some point. And then you can enable that optionally. Then phase 2 would be like, okay, Rolldown Vite is stable enough. It's tested. Things work. Let's merge all the things over into the actual Vite package. So then you have Rolldown in there. And full bundle mode is still optional at that point. And phase 3 would be full bundle mode is the default. That's like the direction they were heading.
Did Evan write Rollup or no?
No, Rich Harris. Okay. Rich Harris did Rollup actually in the beginning. Yeah.
Svelte. And so, okay, so just so that people are not lost, RSback is Webpack in Rust, and Rolldown is slightly more than Rollup in Rust.
Yeah, that's why like it's always difficult because of the name. Obviously, it's very insinuating. Like, okay, it's just this like Rustified Rollup, but it's definitely more than that. We always try to communicate that, though. Yeah, we'll give our best to make sure that's the case.
Thanks. I wanted to ask you, as a plugin author for traditional Vite, let's call it, before Rolldown, what am I going to have to change in my plugins? Not that I'm a plugin author, but if there's a plugin author listening, do I need to like write Rust in my plugins, or do I need to? Okay, so what's that journey? Yeah,
so it's very important that that contribution, like it would be horrible if like all Vite plugins now have to be Rustified, because then there would no contribution, no adoption. So we always try to make sure that the things that can stay in JavaScript, they should stay there. So one important thing, you don't have to do necessarily a lot of things to like get things up and running, because the most things, they just work as before. You can have performance improvements. So there is a new thing. Vite plugins, basically, you have hooks. So like, okay, I want to transform some code, right? And then I say, this should only happen for JavaScript files, or for files that have like, I don't know, question mark, and then some kind of query to say, okay, I want to handle these specifically. And usually what you do in a code, in your transform, it's a function, you say, okay, if that regex matches, or if they end with this query parameter, then do something, or do the early return, say if they don't, then do nothing. Now the problem is, if you do that in the function, then obviously the bundler has to always call a plugin and say, okay, does it apply? Do something for all the files. That's tricky. And we can't just like infer, okay, maybe somewhere there's a condition. So instead, we have something called hook filters. So instead of having that hook defined, you can say, here is a filter, and here is the handler, so the function from before. And that regex that you check, or that name that you check, or whatsoever, you can move that into a filter before, and can say, include these files, exclude these files, do a mixture of both. And this is very easy to then translate into Rust as well. So it's way easier and way more performant to check already, okay, I don't have to execute that function again and again. I know exactly when I have to. And that's a change. That's also like something PRs can easily do, because you can do it right now as well in plain Vite. It won't have any big impact right now in terms of performance, but it will as soon as people, maybe also your end users of the plugin, will switch over to Rolldown Vite. So that's one of the things that we can do. And just to add there, if once again you have a plugin that maybe is unmaintained, then you as a user of Rolldown Vite can even do that. There's something called with filter. So you can basically do the same in userland and say, okay, I have this plugin, only load that when there's a certain condition met, like a regex and so on, so on. So even in userland, you can do that and either like fine-grainedly tune the plugins you use, or if they're unmaintained, you can switch it up as well.
Fantastic. I love how much control we yield to the user here. Cool. I'm very excited about Rolldown, mainly because, there's a lot of skeptics. Some listen to the podcast, but others also on social media will hear things like Rolldown, because it's Rust-based, makes build times a lot faster. As you mentioned with Excalidraw, double digits.
16 times, by the way. I just checked that. Yeah,
wow,
16 times
16x faster.
So 22.9 seconds, and that was down to 1.4. That's pretty decent.
My goodness. That's massive. And people will hear this and go like, yeah, but I'm okay waiting. They'll be like, yeah, I'm used to the pain. But the interesting thing is, this reminds me of like Apple in the Steve Jobs era, where he used to come up on stage and introduce like the new iPhone and be like, just by the way, it's like 0.99 millimeters thinner and 15 grams lighter or something like this. And I always remember people watching this on stage, they would go like, yeah, who cares? I like the heavy phone. Yeah. But then they would later buy the phone and hold it in their hand and be like, wow.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly when we talk about measures like this, like 16x faster, you really have to like build something with Rolldown and feel it to understand.
I had to experience it. Yeah.
Exactly. I had a similar experience with, for example, Bun, the runtime. In contrast to Node.js, it is really, really fast in some cases. And you just saying numbers and hearing numbers will never come close to the experience. And so I just want to like double click on this idea of if anyone's listening and you're not convinced with the numbers, try it out.
Yeah. Exactly. It's the best part. The migration is like very, very simple. It's really like an alias or an override and that's it. And then you don't even have to like go into like deep performance tweaking. Just like give that a try and see how that works. Especially if you have like an SPA, and once again, no matter which framework you use there, as long as it's Vite based, you're good to go. And I want to even iterate a bit more on that, because I'm talking, of course, with a lot of people in the community about that. It's not only the bundler, right? Because so the bundler also has dependencies, and dependencies there is the oxidation compiler, OxC. It's very interesting because these are basically tools also written in Rust for JavaScript. And now I wonder, okay, why is there like this big chain of dependencies? Well, of course, because you can use things separately as well. So very common things like a parser in libraries, like, hey, please parse that file. I want to change things. In Next.js, for example, we use that as well to say, please parse a certain file. I need some meta information I want to extract, for example. And then it's great to have a Rust-based parser because it's way faster. It's 3 times faster than like SWC, which is, I think, very popular in the React world, and also Rust-based. So that's pretty nice. But there's also more for the user-facing land, so to say. And then we once again come closer to the overarching theme of the unified toolchain, because OxC doesn't only come with a parser, with a resolver transformer and so on, like Minifire, also great, but a linter. There is a linter, it's called OxLint, and it is around 50 to 100 times faster than ESLint. And you can use it also today. And I know the segue is long, but I want to touch on that because like you have to experience that. If you ever experience the point of like, okay, I want to lint some files and it takes ages, or I want to lint this file and it takes 2 seconds, these like these 1,000 tiny paper cuts, they hurt. They can hurt. So there's the way. In a Rust-based linter, we have over 500 rules, so more than 500 rules already ported over from ESLint. And if you have like small to medium application, you can easily switch. There's a migration script that sets everything up for you, and we even have an ESLint plugin that you can add that basically says all the rules that OxLint can cover, you don't have to run them. So in case you have some custom rules that you can't run in OxLint yet, no problem. You can use them in tandem and still get a pretty significant performance boost.
Did you say OxLint is 50 to 100x faster than ESLint?
Correct. Yeah.
Oh my! And this is not. This doesn't scale proportionally to the size of the code base.
Well, so it's of course, if you have more files to run, then it will take a bit longer. But as it's Rust, you can parallelize things. It also depends on the cores as well. So Bun, for example, good that you mentioned it, uses OxLint for all their files. For Preact as well, for example.
So assuming you have a code base of 100 million files, ESLint will always be 50 to 100 times slower than OxLint. So all other variables remaining the same.
Yeah, like I would say so. There are a lot of examples of people like trying things out around there. And of course, if you have to run both in tandem because you have some custom rules, that's a different story. But if you just use OxLint, it will be a big improvement.
This is incredible. I had previously Josh Goldberg on the podcast. We'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. Excellent person, really fantastic maintainer of ESLint, and man, or maybe contributor to ESLint, maintainer of the TypeScript ESLint plugin. On this episode, I made it very clear. I hate ESLint. I hate using ESLint. I think it's so painful. I really do not like. I disable it in VS Code or Cursor now because. I run Apple Silicon, man. Like I train machine learning models on this device, right? Like it's a capable device, but ESLint somehow will take like 2 or 3 minutes sometimes, and will throw false positives because it hasn't updated itself yet, and it's a pain. So like when you say things like OxLint is 50 to 100 times faster. This is probably the thing that I'm most excited about.
And that's also the part of it as well. Like rewriting on Rust is not just because it's a trend. It's really because for these things, it matters a lot. And then, like, to be fair, that's also very important. We are looking into the topic of like custom JavaScript plugins, like custom lint rules and so on right now. So you can't run these with OxC or like with OxLint at the moment. And in a way, this is also something where people can give some feedback, and I'll send a link for the discussion in the show notes, because it's basically finding a good level of like, okay, what should we do? We could, in theory, say, let's fork ESLint or contribute and make a Rustified ESLint. But then you have the problem, all the legacy issues will be there. There are like tons of maintenance effort. You have to keep in sync. So that's in a way not really feasible. You can go the other extreme and say, okay, let's do a fully different JavaScript API. And then you have the problem of adoption, but at least you have JavaScript. We'll probably like right now try to like figure out the way to say how much of the ESLint API we can support without losing on performance. Because of course, if you run JavaScript, once again, it's different than just like Rust-based rules. So if you like out there use custom ESLint rules and have thoughts on them, please. Send some messages over in your thoughts, because it's very appreciated. We want to make sure, because it's a community project in the end as well, but therefore the whole app dev community, and all your opinions are not only valid, they're important and they should be heard. So leave a comment.
Fantastic. I love this about how open the projects from VoidZero are. You mentioned OxC. We mentioned ESLint. For those who aren't familiar, it's a tool that will show you warnings and errors if your code is maybe not the cleanest, and you can configure what clean code means by rules, and so it's just a nice like comfort layer on your code. Let's talk about OxC. You mentioned OxC a few times, and we talked also about what it is, but I think it's worth spending some time clarifying, because you said there's OxLint, which is a linter. So OxC is not a linter. Do I understand correctly that OxC is more like a toolkit, where OxLint is a part of it, but there's other parts for... Mm-hmm.
So OxC is basically the oxidation compiler. It's that set of tools you have. And in there you have like the parser, the transformer, the minifier, the linter, the formatter, which is work in progress right now. And like these things are, for example, obviously are used by Rolldown. So the topic of like transforming, of course, if you want to transform things and parse things as a bundler, then you use the underlying tools there. But you can also use them all separately. So if you have a project where it's like, oh, I just want to walk the tree, no problem. There's a package called OxC Walker. I can walk the abstract syntax tree, so the representation of your code in like a tree structure, so you can do things on them, and that will work. And yeah, as I said, the most interesting part for like the user-facing, not so like tooling nerd interested people are the linter and the formatter, which is work in progress. The linter is in beta, and maybe the minifier, because the results there are also pretty good and fast.
So OxC, the Oxide compiler, just so I understand correctly, wraps the OxLint and the parser, the transformer, and the linter.
So it's not really.
Yes?
It's really interesting. It's not a wrap it, think about more as like that's the collection of tools, but you can't install the oxidation compiler as is. You always have to install these separate packages, so to say. So it's really
the oxidation compiler is not a thing.
Yeah, it's more of a collection of things. That's correct.
Got
They're all
you.
in one project though, so it's all like in the GitHub repository. It's all one project because they're also, of course, related. But yeah, you split them up into different
Fantastic.
crates in Rust or npm packages.
And then you pick and choose based on your development toolchain. Hey, that's awesome. So let's clarify all these relationships, starting from the top down, because this is so important, and I think people are going to be confused, and so let's make them very clear. So at the very top in userland, you've got Vite, which is your tool to build and package and ship web applications. Under the hood, and this is future Vite, this is not today's Vite. Under the hood, you've got Rolldown, which will handle development builds without bundling, because you have everything linked locally on your device. You don't need one JavaScript bundle. You can just share dependencies. So it will handle linking dependencies and creating a development server and so on locally, and also will handle bundling your code into one big JavaScript or small JavaScript or multiple JavaScript bundles for a production environment. So Rolldown will handle all of this, and it's Rust. And Rolldown uses elements from OxC, which is a tool chain. It's a collection of tools. And particularly, it uses the parser to parse JavaScript into a syntax tree and then transform it if needed. It also uses the linter to catch issues with the code and various other components from OxC. Do I understand these relationships correctly? What did I miss?
That's absolutely correct. I think like even on top of Vite, if you want to, you can also put like some kind of meta framework if it's not just a Vite plugin. But other than that, yeah, correct.
Hey,
of course, with the linter, just to be clear, you have to like add that to your project, so that's not automatically coming in. But I think the most important part of like the whole thing, because the structure is quite clear. Here you have the benefit that you use always the same tool, and ideally in the future, like a file, if that's parsed once, well, it's cached. You don't have to parse it with 5 different tools because that Vite plugin maybe uses a Babel transform, so you need to do other things. And here is all these different tools that can be used. Well, if they all use the same foundation in a way, that's also speed, right? Think of like, I don't know, JSX transforms. Oh yeah, they're already cached. We already did it before, so we don't have to like do it again and spend CPU cycles and time on that. That will be a bright thing. And we can even touch on like, okay, there are things like testing with vtest, of course. You want to write your documentation at some point. There's also TS down, yet another tool, which is more interesting for library authors. So if you have a library and you want to bundle that, you can configure Rolldown, or you can just use, let's say, the tool called TS down. It's like TS up, maybe like especially library authors might have heard of that, which is based on Rollup. And TS down is based on Rolldown. It's just like a very simple thing sitting on top of Rolldown and just saying, okay, here's your library. I want to, image your declarations. I want to have ESM and CGS export and run a publint to make sure that all types are set correctly and the publishing settings are correct. And then it's just without a lot of configuration, you can bundle your library without also like diving into all the details. So that's something that's also there.
I have some questions. The community has asked, there's a GitHub discussion or issue about, discussion number 153 on Rolldown, which is talking about they want a type checker written in Rust that lives inside of OxC, that's yes. OxC, or even inside Rolldown. And I empathize with this because I write TypeScript as my daily driver, and sometimes, as we all know, the TypeScript server just fails, or the TypeScript compilation is slow, understandably. Microsoft has mentioned they're rewriting TypeScript, or at least the compiler, in Golang to make it faster. And this may, of course, affect OxC or OxC support for type checking and so on. But I find this interesting, this discussion on GitHub. And we'll put a link to this in the show notes, because the community clearly wants a type checker written in Rust because it's assumedly faster, but Microsoft disagrees with Golang. Can you elaborate on that? For example, what's the current strategy? Are we just going to use TypeScript's isolated declarations to speed up checks?
Correct.
Or are they going to actually like make a new type checker?
Yeah, so it is very funny. The question is also like, since the company exists, I think I also asked the similar thing, and it was really funny because it was a day after Evan heard from the TypeScript team that they will do Go. Like it was back in October. He learned about that, and the day after was the interview, and he didn't tell me. And I was saying like, oh yeah, he just said for type checking, and he stated it multiple times, and I also agree, this is something we can't do. So nobody can build a TypeScript type checker that is as up to date as Microsoft team does. You always
because
just
they make the language.
Yeah, like they can do it because exactly they make the language, they have the specs. Otherwise, you need you always just catch up with the latest changes. And yeah, so Evan knew they will port it over to Go, and I was like, back then when he was saying like, oh yeah, Microsoft is doing something there, we'll see in the future. I was just like, they're rewriting it. And I said like, in Rust. I was not even thinking about it, but Go is the better choice. I think that was also well explained by the TypeScript team in terms of like they don't want to rewrite it, they want to port it. So yeah, type checking, we will use the TypeScript Go as soon as it's ready. Right now, isolated declarations work pretty well, so that's the way to go for now. But we don't intend to do anything around type checking because that's Microsoft area. More interesting will be like type-aware linting, but that's a different challenge, and we'll see how we tackle that.
Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on isolated declarations? It's a compiler configuration in TypeScript, but I'm fairly confident there's people going like, what is he talking about?
Yeah, so if you have TypeScript, of course, like you have type inference, and then you could say, basically, if in your TypeScript project, each file makes sense on their own. So you don't need like all these like crazy links of like, hey, I have to check this and there. And usually if you use like erasable TypeScript syntax, so like no namespaces, no enums and so on, even with that, there are a few things around it. You can say, okay, dear type checker, please just treat each file as separately, so like as their own, as the usual transformers do as well. And that means they don't have to like check the whole thing. So they really have isolated, that's the name, declarations, so per file, which gives that speed up by saying, okay, I'll just skip checking everything for it, but treat that file separately.
But does that mean you can't import and export types?
Oh, no, you can. You still can. It's mainly focused on not using the full, in this case, unneeded power of the type system that's there and all the structure there. But yeah, the best case is, especially if you're a library author, this is pretty straightforward for you to enable. And usually if you use erasable syntax, which is more or less the default now, it's also, it shouldn't be big trouble.
Fantastic. You mentioned OxC is much faster than SWC, which is the small web compiler.
3 times, roughly.
We're selling 3 times faster. Yeah. So now you're not even competing like Rust to Go or Rust to TypeScript. You're like Rust versus Rust. How? What leads to that 3 times faster thing? Since both are written in Rust, is it just more efficient code? Is it higher parallelism? I'm curious about what makes it 3 times faster. So
I really hope there will be a talk in the future on that for all the details, because unfortunately my Rust performance knowledge is very limited. I know there are a lot of things that Boshan and Overlook Motel, so the people that are involved, and of course all the other people in OxC and Rolldown, that they do to improve performance, especially on these low-level parts. They're very focused on that. So sometimes there's just like PR, oh, here, 5% faster in the parser because we can remove these conditions. And there are like benchmark setups. So it's all like very result driven there, so to say. Plus, I think the other part there is that all these people working on these tools have a pretty good experience. For example, Boshan was contributing in the past to Rome or Biome, well, one of them for sure. Worked, for example, also on our S-Pack, like some other contributors, and then eventually started working on Rolldown OxC at VoidZero. So it's also like knowing, let's say, the tooling ecosystem and Rust for a while. I think that also helps a lot. Not saying that the people from SWC doesn't, but I think, or don't, that is just another part that adds up here as well.
Right. You mentioned OxC has a collection of tools: transpiling, parsing, linting, as you mentioned, yeah. OxC-lint.
It's OxLint, OxLint in this case. Otherwise, it's OxC-parser transform whatsoever, but it's OxLint, yeah.
Why? So, okay, maybe a discussion for another
good question.
It's like,
probably like ESLint, OxLint. Yeah,
I got it. Okay, yeah. Okay, so OxLint. We haven't touched yet on code formatting, which was kind of you mentioned earlier. Rome started with like, let's do a formatter and a linter. What's the story there? Do you have like OX format, OX prettier?
Yeah. So there will be a prettier compatible formatter. Like the latest status, this was not a huge focus at the moment, just because, well, first of all, formatting is a lot of well, there are a lot of possible paths there to go. Also, code can be written in so many different ways. So formatting is a lot of work. Plus, I think there are more important parts of the toolchain that should be tackled first, as mentioned before, like the whole foundation, so transformer, parser, and so on. The thing with starting or like having a formatter, switching formatting is pretty, I would say, like switching formatter is easier than switching a bundler or a transformer or a parser. Mainly because, well, okay, now people use the stylistic rules of ESLint, and maybe they say, okay, they use, then they switch to prettier or whatever. It's way less friction than switching out any, let's say, more integrated part. But on the other hand, the more integrated parts are also more important for example, something like Rolldown. So that's why, in a way, the formatter, like I think as we speak, there are works on another try on that, so beyond prototyping. But that will probably be one of the latter parts to be completed in the toolchain. But it's definitely something we have on the radar because, once again, it should be a unified toolchain. The formatter is part of that.
Interesting. I'm curious about the boundary. We've used the word toolchain many times, and for now, I think we can agree a toolchain in this context means something to bundle, something to serve, something to test, something to format, something to lint. And maybe a few others, but it's interesting because a project like Bun extends this idea of a toolchain to include the runtime. Literally, like let's just add a new runtime. I'm curious why the limit so far with VoidZero is everything except the runtime. And are you all considering maybe even tapping into the runtime space at some point?
So yeah, exactly. VoidZero is runtime agnostic, and I think with the focus that we have right now, it is no way good to be runtime agnostic. So there are a lot of interesting projects, and there's been like a new runtime a couple of weeks ago, I think, as well. So there are things popping up here and there. There's also like Paul for example, which is very interesting to work at. Not just only mention like Dino, Bun, Node, of course. I would never say never. So who knows? But at the moment, I'm not aware of any plans also tapping in the runtime part there, mainly because what we can achieve right now and focus on, okay, it's the web development part. Speed gains are already like more than significant. Like they're amazing. The progress is looking good. So I think starting on that end and like continuing seeing where that goes. Would I rule it out? As I said, I wouldn't, but it's definitely not our focus at the moment.
Great. That's good to know. I can stick with Node.js or Bun or whatever.
That's also the other part that like if you want to drive adoption, you don't really want to limit to like, hey, you have to use this runtime now, and then like making it optional is like, yeah, I think with the foundation that we have, that's time better spent in our case.
Yeah. We're still talking about OxC. I'm curious, Vite itself has a really great plugin system. I've written a few plugins myself. I'm curious, does OxC, what's the extensibility story around OxC? Is it something that you anticipate people can just contribute? So for example, with OxLint, you can probably make lint rules. But with the maybe formatter, with the compiler, the transformer, are you expecting this to be a pluggable thing? Because I imagine for the transformer, you'd need to have like Babel had a bunch of plugins for future ES language features. I'm curious, about the rules and plugins there.
Yeah, so for OxLint, regarding the custom rules, so if you want to add a rule there, you'd have to write it Rust right now, but that's why we're also talking about like running these custom rules in the GitHub issue that I mentioned before. Otherwise, well, right now it's a lot of compatibility. For example, one thing that I stumbled upon is Solid, for example. Solid.js is transforming JSX through a Babel, DOM, whatsoever. So like a custom transform there, basically. A JSX DOM expressions. There we go. And uses that under the hood. So that's, for example, something that will be really difficult. Either it's a custom transform, so like a custom plugin using OxC. In the future, there might be even tighter integration. But right now, we also focus on being Babel compatible, so to say, or saying the transformer, the parser, like, okay, using ES3, like the standard that's used by the other tools, and making sure that's compatible. So it's easier to switch out other tools like, I don't know, AS3, Walker, something like that with OxC. And because a lot of things are cached, even though you don't say like, okay, I may have to run the operation again and again, you don't have that huge overhead. So that's I would say the first step. What's in terms of pluggability, I think the key part is really Rolldown plugins, where you can use all the Rollup plugins out there if they even need it, because a lot of things are also built in, like JSX transformation, syntax lowering. So what you said before, like having, I don't know, the knowledge coalescing operator and then replacing that with a more appropriate way of writing that, because all the browsers can't do that for certain targets. So that's already included all in the bundler itself. But yeah, if you say like, okay, I have a plugin, I want to do some things, do some transforms, then you can do that all on that level. And that's was one of the important parts. We want to have that flexible and simple plugin API to make sure the community can build whatever they need. So that's a key part. On the lower levels, probably not as much, except for Linter and probably Formatter, but especially on the bundler level, that's the interesting part there.
Fantastic. Now that we understand a lot, by the way, thank you. This is such an informative deep dive on Rolldown and OxC. Now that we understand their design a little bit more, I would love to talk about how they stack up against the current tool chain, so to speak. For example, ESBuild, which is used for development time packaging and hot module loading. It's built in Go, as you mentioned, and as far as we've discussed, I believe ESBuild minifies code slightly differently, right, than Rolldown. It uses the same AST during bundling, but there's a two-step approach, as far as I know, as far as we've discussed, with Rolldown plus OxC. Use separate ASTs for bundling and for minification. Why? I'm curious about why. What's the trade-off here in terms of engineering details?
So Rolldown should use by default the OxC minify package as well. So it's also using all of that of OxC. And I mean, separating, I don't know, the transformer or and the minifier kind of makes sense by saying these are two different operations, right? If I say, okay, I don't need any minification, then why spending time on that? I just want to apply these plugins, or maybe have syntax lowering to run it in all the browsers, but I don't need to minify it necessarily. So splitting it up also in terms of responsibilities helps a lot. And of course, the goal is, as it is right now with Rolldown Vite, you don't need ESBuild to do anything anymore, even the minifying, because you can use Rolldown's built-in minifier. And OxC minify, which is the one that Rolldown uses, is also it's pretty decent. Even though the official state is in alpha, because there are some improvements that are not built into yet. So, for example, SWC is a little bit better in terms of the common benchmarks like TypeScript.js. So just take that. It's almost 11 megabytes, unminified, ungzipped, and then just minified. And SWC gets to 70% size reduction, so to 3.32 megabyte. And OxC minify comes to 3.35 megabytes. So they're just 3 kilobyte difference. But time-wise, that's the other interesting factor, right? Not only how small, but also how fast. OxC takes 444 milliseconds, and SWC takes 5 times that, so 2.18 milliseconds.
Wow. Yikes.
So that's a bit of a different here. And ESBuild is roughly in the same league as OxC minify, so it takes just 50 milliseconds more, but the output is 14 kilobyte larger. So also there are a lot of improvements still up to be made, and we're quite comfortable that we are quite confident that we're comfortably also challenging SWC there more and more.
Fantastic. I'd love to talk a little bit about the dev server piece specifically, because currently, as you've mentioned, Vite will pre-bundle dependencies with ESBuild during development time. If we use Rolldown, because as you mentioned, it's not the case now, but it's coming. If Rolldown is used locally to solve the same problem, how does that affect, for example, two things? Cold starts. For example, if I start my dev server, I think Next.js, for example, is just notorious for a lot of people complaining about, oh my goodness, this dev server takes 15 seconds to start. I assume this will get faster, and I'd like you to confirm or deny. But two things. One, cold starts, and two, hot module replacement. How the latency between I hit save and stuff updates. I'm curious how that affects that. Specifically, also adding to the context of this question, TypeScript added years ago. They added incremental TypeScript compilation, right? So putting all of this together, will Rolldown, I mean, obviously I expect some performance benefits around all of these cold starts and hot module replacement. Yeah, I'm curious if we can have a little bit more detail there. Was that measured already, for example, like the time to cold start, the time to hot module replacement during development mode?
So let's separate that into three parts. I think the first one is right now exactly we have Vite with the dev server ES build, just like very, very simple layer of like a little bit of pre-bundling, but not like full bundle mode or anything. The next step, which is also, as I said before, already possible through Rolldown Vite for the extra package, is that you use Rolldown also for the dev mode. It's still unbundled mostly, so the changes are not like, let's say, too noticeable. Just like switching out without like any full bundle mode that will come up, but at the moment it's not there. It is roughly the same, which is good because it's fast right now. So for like small, medium projects, it's all fine. As I said before, the larger like enterprise projects, that might take a while still. You could see some improvements there. It also depends what plugins are used and so on, because you still have to execute these, right, in dev mode. But most interestingly will be really the full bundle mode. There is a PR, so it's work in progress. That's why I can't give any measurements here. But what we expect is basically for small and medium projects to behave as fast as unbundled right now. So that should be fast. We're planning on incremental builds as well, of course, to make sure this will work. And for large and enterprise projects, well, then it will be even faster because, as I said before, you don't have like these tens of thousands of requests. You have then just a few because it's bundled in dev mode, and thanks, well, to performance optimizations, so not only Rust, but it's also, of course, a part of it, we'll basically get the best of all worlds. That's also why the goal is to make full bundle mode the default and at some point remove unbundled mode, because if there are no trade-offs, well, why keep one of them and maintaining them if everything gets better? But of course, we want to get there. So as soon as also full bundle mode is available, I can only encourage people to try it out, like Rolldown Vite right now.
Fantastic. I'd like to switch gears. Honestly, this has been so far so amazing because it's such a deep dive on like internal compiler details and development tools and so on.
I also I learned so much like diving into these things, and there's still so much to learn. It's incredible.
Yeah. But let's maybe switch and talk a little bit about community, because you said you work now as DevRel, developer relations, with VoidZero, and I've been doing DevRel for quite a while, and I've seen DevRel go. I'm not going to ask you about this. This is probably a discussion for another time. But I've seen DevRel go wrong, where people think it's a function of marketing, and they talk about like lead generation. And frankly, I think DevRel is not so much that, but it's a function of product engineering. You have to shape the product because you're building experience for developers. I'm curious, maybe just to start, what is DevRel like at VoidZero? Meaning, is it geared towards lead generation, or is it product engineering, or what's the deal there?
Yeah. So don't worry, I haven't heard lead generation ever since starting there. So I mean, let's start very simple. I always I've seen a lot of people doing DevRel, and I always have that mantra in mind: DevRel, not DevSell. Now the best part is
who came up with that?
I have no idea, but I've heard it a couple of times. And I fully agree. The best part is, well, right now there's nothing to sell. Everything we do is open source. So that also makes my job a bit easier on that note. But to be honest, how is that? Well, I think it is pretty interesting because in a way, like I did DevRel for Vue and Nuxt, so to say, like not as a paid job. And it wasn't that big of a change in like what I do. It's more like the focus shifting a bit more towards like more the JavaScript wide ecosystem. And then it's also like in that way, with Nuxt, it was pretty interesting because I was working on the project. I had a very deep understanding of everything. I could read through the code. I knew most of the lines as well. And now it's like, okay, there are a lot of things written in Rust. I understand the concept and principles, but my Rust is, well, a bit rusty, so to say.
Hey.
Yeah, so that was a bit of a change in a way. But when I started position, I basically tried to explain that I want to be the glue between the community and the team. So in both ways as well, like a two-way binding, so to say. In one way to understand, okay, what is basically the vibe of the community? What's like just temperature checks? How are they feeling about certain changes? What are they looking for? What are they maybe missing? That could be in terms of like urgent issues, like thoughts on certain topics, or like right now with OxLint and the whole like ESLint plugin topic, also just like talking to the people, get an understanding what they need. But from people active in the community, but also on the other hand, from early adopters, for example, using Rolldown Vite. So we're in contact, for example, GitLab. I found them trying out Rolldown Vite, got in contact there. They, for example, had like 100 times memory decrease while using Rolldown Vite. That was insane when I read it. It was like amazing. And just also like, so pinpointing issues, because people have interesting setups, right? Not talking about GitLab specifically there, but every application can have a wide range of interesting requirements. And then just saying, okay, try it out, like give us some feedback, what works and what doesn't work. I don't know, dev works, build works, a bit of like, making the work there to do maybe some reproductions here and there. That's also in a way part of it, to just make sure, okay, showing if people want to try it out, they want to help. And that is not even like tied to big corporations. I had a lot of people writing on Blue Sky or Twitter, like, hey, I tried it out. Here's an error. And like, okay, look, there, you can try this. So a bit of like troubleshooting and helping as well. And on the other hand, of course, also making things digestible. So that's the plan for also the next week. So writing more blog posts, giving out bi-weekly updates, explaining things that are like, I don't know, what does it mean to be ES3 compatible? But what does it mean for the average web developer? What is the benefit of that? And bringing all these like tooling parts like closer to why should the average web dev care? What's the difference? Or similar. And then also like documentation, right? Like writing, for example, as I mentioned, the migration guide for a Rolldown, I co-authored that to a bigger part. At the Rolldown docs, I'm also like working quite a bit more on them. So all around that, I would say it's a very broad space, from like community building, product engineering, as you said, developer experience, or like user experience is another part there. Probably at some point also like events as well, like speak at conferences. ViteConf is also coming up in October, so that will be super interesting as well. It's a broad space, and I also like talk to quite a few DevRel people, and of course, no DevRel job's the same. It all depends a lot on the product as well and the company. But all in all, like basically my goal is there, like be the person that people can ask questions to, or like can share their thoughts or concerns, and then I'm happy to like go through that and make sure that you heard, and also give feedback to the team. So make sure that also they know what the community, so people out there are interested in.
Fantastic. Yeah. I love that it's so diverse. I saw y'all did a JS tooling meetup by Vite and VoidZero some time ago. Oh, no,
and there will be another one in San Francisco where Evan will go in May, I think. So you should go there if you're around SF.
Awesome. Wow, cool. So y'all, and this is part of your job to organize this?
No. So the meetup there, not specifically, but probably like at some point might be like meetup organization and so on. So at the moment it's more focused on the content creation side. But in terms of events, I can at least imagine that there will be more things popping up. So that's
fantastic.
Stay tuned.
Part of DevRel is also encouraging contributors, right? And I ask because many developers know JavaScript, but I doubt as many know Rust. But they maybe want to get involved in things like Rolldown or OxC. What's the plan there to encourage contribution or make it easier for people coming from these ecosystems?
So that's a good one, I would say, especially. So we had, I think yesterday, or a couple days ago, we had a new team member on an OxC team. So like a long-term contributor who learned Rust by contributing to OxC. So it is interesting to see that in a way that already these projects attract people to contribute. So if you're interested in Rust, there are like good first issues labeled in Rolldown and in OxC that you can tackle. And there are Discords for both projects as well. So if you're interested and maybe have some thoughts, or like not sure how to continue, or like a PR that you want to get some feedback on, we usually see these, but still sometimes like, here, I have a branch. Can you take a look? So if some things don't work, post there. I think that's always a great way. Well, contribution is a lot of things, right? So documentation is also super helpful. In general, content creation as well, like that you tried out, I don't know, Rolldown, show how easy it is, these things, or also like surface issues, right? Sending a reproduction like, hey, I tried it out. It doesn't work. Here's the problem. Here's my GitHub repo. here's a thought on that. So there are a lot of ways to contribute. And especially if you're interested in JavaScript or in Rust, there are for both ways to do something.
Fantastic. I love that you say contributions are not just code, not just
so
Rust.
Important. Yeah.
Yeah. You can also contribute in English. And I would add maybe what would be helpful to learn Rust if you don't know is just like vibe code affix to a good first issue.
Try it.
Just like open cursor. Yeah, just be like, hey, I don't know Rust, but help me. And you can like AI assisted learn while also solving the issue. Like everybody wins.
Yeah, for sure. And the good part is there as well. Like we'll have a look and it's like, for example, hey, this is a good start. Take a look here, or I don't know, performance metrics are down. Try it with different structure and so on, so on. So you will definitely get feedback that's useful as well. So we encourage people to contribute if they're interested on like good first issues, or also like if you have a problem, as I said, with Rolldown or OxC, raise an issue, start with that as well. So that's always a good option.
Fantastic. It sounds like there's like an element of mentorship to this where people can actually learn, not just have their PRs or issues rejected.
Oh no.
So
that's why, like, I mean, it's also in a way that keeps on the tradition of like Vue and Vite as well. Like the things are all open source that we're built right now, like OxC, Rolldown, and so on. And people interested in contributing, well, we couldn't do it without other people, right? This is not a one-man project at all. So and it's also like super healthy to see that people are doing that already. So go for it.
Fantastic. Do you have any advice for people wanting to collaborate with other project communities? For example, you mentioned Evan has done some work with the TypeScript team early. That's how we found out like the Golang rewrite. Or for example, working with framework authors of like for example Nuxt, which is in the Vue ecosystem, but we could even say other projects that are not in the Vue like community to community collaboration is so important, and as you've mentioned, it's been like a cornerstone for Vite and Vue and ultimately VoidZero. So do you have any tips there for people who want to maybe integrate closer with other communities?
I think it depends a lot on what you do. For example, if you say, I don't know, we have a project or like a library and we want to make like a, I don't know, wrapper for React, Vue, Svelte, whatsoever, then it never hurts to reach out to the people on the Discord or like get people who are interested in using your library already or maybe asking for a port. Like I think the best example is, and we get back to this, Links, like the framework agnostic mobile framework, right? Where there are issues up for like a Vue integration. I created that one because I saw that the Svelte issue was up there, and I feel like that's also a good idea. I would love to see Svelte on Links, but also Vue in a way. And then people started like, hey, I started a prototype, so people just like got into that, and then more and more people are interested in topics and work on it. But other than that, like also raising issues, go to like the Discords or social media, get in touch with some people. Most of the maintainers out there are very happily responding to like thoughts. They don't always have time. So like, oh yeah, I can write a wrapper for you. But more like, oh, here are people in the community that might be interested, or join our Discord. We have some folks that would love to work on that, or maybe someone else did already. So I would say, yeah, getting in touch is the way to go there. On the respective community Discords, on social media, reaching out, because that never hurts.
Fantastic. And being a decent person and being respectful of people.
Yes.
If you reach out not in the right way, you're going to have a bad time. Well, listen, Alex, as usual, you've given us so much to consider and learn. I mean, so we established, for example, on this light box behind you, VoidZero is a company that began out of Vue and the good work of Evan Yu and with projects like Vite. It's a for-profit VC-backed company, but what is open source stays open source. There's some ominous talk about Vite Plus, which we'll find out about in some time. But ultimately, Vite is the standard for building web applications, and it gives you powerful bundling with both ESBuild and Rollup, which is both being replaced by Rolldown, which is a Rust-based it's a Rust-based toolchain that uses under the hood OxC, or the oxidation compiler, which is a toolchain of linting, formatting, transpiling, compiling, all based in Rust to offer the best-in-class performance for the best-in-class applications. So cool. Did I miss something? I'm curious. What did I miss? What final advice do you have for people? What excites you the most about the future of VoidZero and these projects? And maybe let me add one question to this.
Yeah.
What should listeners pay attention to going forward?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it was a really good summary of like the structure there, like the big picture. We could also, like I said, dive deep into like, as I said, the TS down for like libraries, or like a VTest and a VPress for docs and so on. But things will also come together, and these could be like easily extra episodes. So I think that was good. It was pretty nice. What excites me the most is seeing people like to try out like the things, try like Rolldown Vite at the moment. So like, okay, that bundler, and like having an almost frictionless, in a lot of cases, just like, okay, I just swapped out the package. It works now. The build is faster, and then you can tell like, yeah, but it's you can even do more if you want to. Here's the guide that says you can enable like more Rustified plugins, or like you can do this and that with the filter things that describe. So I'm really what really brings joy is like people. Well, on the one hand, people trying it out, but also on the other hand, seeing the whole VoidZero team working on these things, and then like, oh, it got faster again. So there's not, we focus on stability and compatibility right now, right? That's the focus. So performance is like a little side effect. Of course, we pay attention to that, but it's not like we do like hardcore performance optimizations. So I'm really excited what comes next around that. And of course, I'm excited for like more people trying it out and getting more and more stable. Yeah, what people should pay attention, I think, socials as usual. We have a Blue Sky account at VoidZero dev, I think, or VoidZero.dev. Same for Twitter. And other than that, yeah, follow along also YouTube channel where we have one video about what Rolldown is. But as you explained it very well, Tejas, that's more as the gist there. It's a very like short 38 or so seconds explainer. It's also on the docs. But yeah, there's also more to come there. So more in-depth things. And if you have any questions out there around VoidZero, Rolldown, OxC, Vite, and whatever around that space, then just drop them there. I'm happy to answer them all. I'll check the comments. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll put, of course, links to all of these in the show notes. Alexander, for real, thank you on behalf of all the listeners. I can't wait to try it myself and just experience that joy, experience the feeling of, wow, this used to take 20 seconds, it takes one. Experience the feeling in my hand of this like metaphorical iPhone that is so much lighter and thinner, and I'm like, wow, this is so cool. So I will definitely be giving that a try. I encourage all the listeners to do so as well. And once again, on behalf of myself and everyone here, thank you so much for being a part of this episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining my discussion with Alexander Lichter. It's such a deep dive, and it's only getting started. As he mentioned, there's probably more episodes there. If you'd like to follow him, there's links in the show notes. If you'd like to follow VoidZero, that's voidzero.dev, and all relevant links are in the show notes. He's also on X, and he has a pretty active, even more than this one, YouTube channel. Those links as well are in the show notes, or you can just search for Alex Lichter on YouTube. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, then a great way to support it with really no effort is just share this with your friends, family, and on social media. Just share it. Share a link wherever you're listening, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. If you're on YouTube, if you like the video and leave a comment, that would be a great help to me with your suggestions and your feedback, as well as helping the algorithm like surface it for people. Similarly, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, if you leave a review, any review up to 5 stars, that would really help as well. Just surface this and get in front of more people if you think it's worth sharing. For now, I want to take some time and thank you for being a part of this episode, for being a part of the podcast, and for your interest in engineering.